Happy Tuesday to most of you, and thank you all who have come on today. I will just present some disclosures that I have. I thought I'd start by sort of talking about registered reports, which were introduced by Chris Chambers in the journal Cortex as a possible way to reduce publication bias and reporting biases. And they're a really interesting introduction. They have now come across on several disciplines, and it would be really interesting to have people present at the Congress as to, indeed, do they reduce reporting biases, and do they reduce publication bias? We've seen some initial work in this area, but I hope that the Congress will provide folks with a lot more opportunities to look and see whether they are effective. One could also ask the question as whether registered reports differ in terms of their success across disciplines, and even ask about their implementation. How have journals implemented them, and have some journals be more successful than others? That would be sort of really interesting and informative research as registered reports continue to grow in numbers and across disciplines. Since the pandemic, there has been really an enormous increase in the number of preprints, no doubt exacerbated by COVID-19. The advantage of preprints might be their sort of equity and people being able to look at them, review them, not based on whether they have money to access particular websites. The question is whether preprints, having not had the formal peer review, whether they're of equal quality, and whether they have more biases associated with them, and what sort of quality control is taking place with preprints. All of that research seems to be really of tremendous interest to the Congress. One could think of both experimental and quasi-experimental and observational research to actually look at preprints. One could look and see what sort of policies journals might have about preprints. Are they similar across disciplines? And the third sort of type of reporting I'll briefly discuss today is predatory journals, which have seen an enormous sort of increase in their last decade. The question is, for example, we know that initially people were using predatory publications in promotion and tenure. Is that still going on? Is it a bigger problem? Is it a smaller problem? Does a problem differ across disciplines? Are predatory journal articles being included in health policy documents? These are all researchable questions, and questions that might be very suitable for the Congress. And what do we know about sort of reputational risk to multiple stakeholders, such as the researcher, institution, and funder of predatory journals? Sort of moving across, now looking very briefly at sort of quality assurance. And if we look at audits, for example, and we look at sort of journals and publishers, we look at data transparency, we see that the top guidance, which has been endorsed by literally thousands of journals, and there may be different levels of introduction regarding data transparency across 4 different levels. And the question is, how are journals actually doing? And how has TOP been implemented in these thousands of journals that have endorsed it? These, again, are interesting questions, and there are many different ways to probably tackle this. Would be interesting also to know, have journals used similar sorts of implementation strategies? Are they effective? And is the effectiveness of top guidance in journals and publishers, does it differ by discipline? And really, this is also a question that I've simply used data transparency, but it could be for any standard that folks might be interested in researching. So how do academic institutions do for data transparency? What do we know about funders and data transparency? Are they auditing how their grantees are doing? And again, does that change? Do grantees at different career stage? Is there gender differences between how these standards might be implemented and by whom? And lastly, I'll just touch upon reporting guidelines. The question remains, as recently in a BMJ, is whether reporting guidelines are effective. One can ask this at many different levels. We know from the Equator Network that there are over 400 reporting guidelines. Are they all developed according to a similar standard? And these are questions that definitely, again, could be asked. There are similar sort of questions. Do journals post results on, if journals have published 1,000 papers, how many of those papers have used reporting guideline? Do the guidelines improve the quality of reporting, or do they actually make them worse or not? So these are the sort of questions that I've sort of just been thinking about, and no doubt there are many, many other questions.